Thanks for our prior two presenters for sharing your insights. I am going to speed through this a little bit so we can save some time for discussion. I'll just give you a little bit of background on why we conducted the survey and what we did, and a bit of a preview at some of the results. I will say we have not done a full deep dive into all of the results because there was a wealth of data, but we will definitely commit to keep learning more and more, from the data and applying that to policy. So, what are we talking about? Why did we conduct the U.S. Rare Disease Kovitz vaccine survey? Well, early on in September, HHS commissioned the National Academy of Sciences to come up with a framework for how the COVID vaccine should be prioritized. When this occurred, we consulted with the co-chairs of our Community Congress COVID-19 Response Working Group, which is the group of stakeholders across industry, patient organizations, professional societies, and others that come together to talk about emerging policy issues and the priorities in the rare disease community and help guide the work of the Every Life Foundation. So we worked with the COVID-19 working group, our access working group, board members and other experts to inform our comments on the draft report. And we focused on 4 areas: making sure that adults with rare diseases and conditions that make them vulnerable to severe outcomes are included as a priority group, because in the original draft, it was very much narrowly limited to those with the certain pre-existing conditions that they found in the CDC database to make them more likely for severe outcomes. And we knew that because of the precautions that rare disease community is taking, likely they would not appear in those databases. However, it was reasonable to assume that their conditions would also make them at more risk for severe outcomes. We wanted to call attention to the paid caregivers that work in the homes of rare disease patients, the fact that we need, adults in households that have children with rare diseases to be a focus area, and that we apply these same criteria to children when it comes time to approve vaccine for use for children. So that's where we started with our comments. And when we went back to the working group, a really great discussion ensued. And the fact that we don't know really how our community is feeling about taking a vaccine in the first place. So here we're recommending that they be prioritized, but how are they going to make decisions? Do they want a vaccine? We know that it's not a one-size-fits-all community. So are there aspects of a particular rare disease and the way it impacts you that are going to affect your likelihood of taking a vaccine? So all of these things informed our survey, which we opened from October 20th to November 4th this year, and got an incredible response thanks to all of you and other partners for sharing. We had over 1,400 responses, and just under 2 weeks. So most of those responses were from people with rare diseases. We also had a group of responses from caregivers to adults with rare diseases and caregivers to children, and then some who were both, who answered on behalf of the patients they were taking care of. So what did we want to learn? Again, we wanted to learn more about, do people with rare diseases intend to get vaccinated, and does that intention change based on how the vaccines are approved or authorized by the FDA? And furthermore, does that likelihood change based on what people are considering important in their decision making? Or does it change based on the types of information sources that they're going to rely on to make their decision? So just getting into a little bit of a preview of the results, and I know this is a lot in one table, but just to give you a sense, we did ask for people to tell us more about the diseases that they had, and this is just for the patient respondents. Most of the data you'll see are just for the patient respondents for this presentation, which were a little over 600. So the most common disease category was autoimmune disorders, followed by, we had a great representation from neurologic disorders, neurodegenerative, and I'm not going to go through them all, but one thing that we'll do further in analysis is look at whether there was any associations between how people ranked the likelihood of getting vaccinated and the types of rare diseases that they indicated they were dealing with. So getting into some of the first results, we also asked what were some of the commonly reported effects of the pandemic. So what we gave people was a select all that, what has occurred because of the pandemic. The most common selected answer was that they, of course, refrained from in-person contact with people outside of their household, canceled travel plans. Over half had effects on mood or behavior, delays in obtaining regular medical care. And then you'll see just a little word cloud from some of the free text answers that were provided. And what are the common words? The larger the word, the more common it was stated. Things like telehealth, lost work was definitely mentioned many times. And we see this mirroring what we've learned from some of the other community surveys. We also asked if people typically receive CDC vaccines, because that can inform whether they'd be likely, to get the COVID vaccine. And a large portion did typically receive all CDC recommended vaccines. Another thing to point out that only 2.12% of the respondents had been diagnosed with COVID-19, but another nearly 4% had symptoms of COVID, but were not able to obtain a test at the time. So what type of factors do patients care about when making a decision about vaccines? And so what you see here is the percentage of patient respondents who rank the factor as very important. And at the high end of the scale was safety as seen in clinical trials and safety as seen in the real world. So clearly safety was at the top of mind for most respondents. Of course, followed by effectiveness in clinical trials and in real world data. We saw that administration safety, so one aspect of concern for our rare disease patients is where they're going to have to go to get the vaccine, and is that going to be safe? They've taken extreme precautions to avoid any exposure, and based on the requirements of storing and administering the vaccine, are they going to have to be going to somewhere where they're going to risk possibly being exposed to the virus just to get the vaccine? And then you see also clinical trial forbidding it, number of vaccines approved and number of doses were a bit less important. And then a few others, of course, doctor's recommendation was ranked very important by over half of the respondents. Out-of-pocket costs, I think, something that our policymakers have tried to reassure would not become an issue. And then reasonably public sentiment, online information, and friends and family ranked quite low. So we also asked people in a free text question, what is the single most important detail of a new vaccine that you'll need to know before deciding if you proceed with getting that vaccine? I am looking forward to diving into this data and analyzing it. But for now, I wanted to show you just a few of the responses that we got. There's over 1,000 people that wrote in a free response. So we're still categorizing and coding it, but you can see here that it pretty much mirrors what you saw before: effectiveness, side effects, safety, efficacy, is it proven? Is it a live or a dead vaccine? So we heard that come up earlier this morning. Is it going to have a vector? Is it going to affect my ability to work? So there was a whole host of different issues that we'll dive more into, but you can see again, it's that theme of effectiveness, and first, above all, safety was the most common response. Okay, so getting to the meat of it here, what was the likelihood of getting vaccinated going to vary based on the scenario of approval or authorization? So if you look at scenario 1, which is the purple here at the bottom, that is traditional FDA approval. Scenario 2 was specifically, knowing that the vaccine was approved for use in vulnerable populations. And then scenario 3 was emergency use authorization, which is what has occurred so far. And I think it's most useful to compare 1 and 3 with each other. And you'll see it's pretty striking in that the group responding that they were very unlikely to get vaccinated was almost 50% when a vaccine was approved by emergency use authorization. And we suspect that that would directly be related to the lower threshold for effectiveness and the shorter time available to assess the long-term safety profile of the vaccine. So conversely, you see that the green, which is which is the very likely, is actually pretty high for a vaccine that was approved via traditional FDA processes. So I think that you can see that with the vaccine approved by emergency use authorization in scenario 3, that we have a good group of people, 55%, who kind of landed in between. And ultimately, we're going to have to see what factors are important to that group in order to help them understand the information they need to know to make an informed decision. So just looking at it in a different way, those who said they were very likely by scenario, again, traditional approval, almost 50%. However, with EUA, it goes down to under 10%. And then conversely, very unlikely by scenario, EUA is almost 40%, and it decreases to just over 10% for traditional approval. So people, if the vaccine is approved via traditional approval processes, people are less adamantly opposed to getting it. And then we are starting to look at the data to say which factors are significantly associated with the response to the vaccine scenario. And this is just a initial look. However, what we can't determine yet by the analysis that's been done is which direction these associations were significant for. So there was an association between these factors and the responses to the vaccine scenarios. And now we're starting to do more analysis to look at which direction that was in. And then finally, what information sources are patients turning to in order to make informed decisions? And here, I was a little bit surprised it wasn't reversed, but primary care doctor was selected by the largest percentage of respondents, followed by clinical specialists, and then CDC. And the remainder, patient advocacy groups, a little over a third, and only about 10% for online and social media, news sources, and friends and family. So we're going to do a deeper dive into this information, but I wanted to give you a bit of a preview, because I think that our next steps, really, how do we, what else do we want to know from this data, and then really making sure we communicate it with public health officials and other partners that are going to be conducting outreach to our rare disease community as the vaccines become more available and as there are multiple options. And you heard this morning, if you were tuning into Jen's presentation, about a number of different questions that she and others in the rare disease community have to grapple with when deciding whether or not to get vaccinated. And ultimately, we need to use this data and our ongoing interactions with public health and policy officials to make sure that those questions get answered, that the right data gets collected as we assess implementation of the vaccine and the long-term safety profiles. And we'll continue to work with our COVID-19 response working group, as well as our other community Congress working groups, to make sure that that happens.